Hello, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Ask Abhijit Show, episode 157. I hope you're all doing very well. And before we get into the questions, let's see who all is there on the live chat. I can see Sumedha, Tarun, Jigar, Abhigya, Jay Guman, Aniket Raj, Shivagami, Devi, Swapnanil, Bruh, Challenge Accepted, Explorer, Bhavyadeep Rathod, Charge 13X, Liger, Kuldeep, Shardul, Parth, Bhavanendra, Dwij, Shashank, System Tools, Om Bekerikar, Abhineet, Mayur, Karan, Harsh Saveri, Aman, Mao Zedong, Vikash, Ketan, Vinod Patil, Rahul Mahajan, Sakul, Shubhajit, Dharmendra, Dante, Uttam, Krodh, Feminist Slayer, Kaustub, Anuj, Harvey Ropes, Dungar Singh Chauhan. Hello, sir. Good to see you again. Nitul Das, challenge accepted. Manish, Jigar, Shiva Prasad, Shura, Ronak, Amar Singh, Parth, lots of Parths. Ritvik, another Parth, Giga Chad or something like that. System Tools, Harmonica Hero, Ketan, Karan, Jay Guman, Pikachu, Aman, Shubhajit, Explorer, Shashank, Melvin, Vikash, Shebin, Neat, Nikalna, Sanjay, Tanush, G, Winnie, Devdeep, Vinod, Fatty Just Ate, Indian Citizen, Shubham, Napoleon Bonaparte is here. Bruh, I'm Consciousness, Abhinav, Gaurav, Naman Panchal, Smart, Doug, Joseph Stalin, Samarth Acharya, Vault Gaming, and lots of other people. Disha, Anuj, Shriyansh, Tanush, Krodh, and everybody else. Thank you so much for being on the live chat. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much. Uh, with that, let's get into the questions. What questions do we have? Where shall we begin with the questions? Let's start with this. What do we have? All right. Okay. I need to. Okay. So this is about the German foreign minister who came to India for the foreign ministers meeting, the G20 foreign ministers meeting, and I said that she was snubbed by India because she did not get a red carpet welcome, and that's this is the result of that. This is just some small sample of the comments that we got. Shrinu says that's not the reason for red carpet issue. The flight actually reached before half an hour, and this was reported by the German diplomat. Pratik says German foreign minister did not get a cold shoulder from India. It was just her plane arrived ahead of schedule, and she couldn't agree to be on the jet until senior dignitaries arrived to welcome her. Please fact check Abhijit. Abhijit, this is a mistake by your side. She don't same. The plane came early and preparations were not made. All that. Abhishek says wrong info about German welcome. You are compromising facts for speed of video uploads. It seems. Siddharth says you jumped to a conclusion. All those things. Okay. So everyone over here is saying that the uh, aircraft arrived early, and that's why the preparations were not ready, and that's why the lady was given this lack of red carpet welcome. So okay, let's remove this first of all. So let's understand something. The Indian government is not run by children. The government of India, is not run by 12-year-olds. You can see what is the status of a flight. Let me show you how it's done. I mean, what are we? Are we 12 years old, all of us? Let's take a look at this open source site called Flight Radar 24. You can track the exact location of a plane the moment it takes off. And when a very senior person is coming to your nation, when an extremely senior diplomat is coming, the foreign minister of a nation, you keep an eye on what's happening and where the plane is. It is impossible for the government of India to miss the fact that the plane was arriving 30 minutes early or 72 hours early or whatever. The Indian government is not run by 12-year-olds. But maybe the comments, some of them are by 12-year-olds. I'm not sure. Yeah. So this entire matter that was later, the clarification was later issued that the flight came early. Do you know what it's called? It's called a face saver. The German government put out a statement that the plane reached 30 minutes or whatever minutes early, and that's why the arrangements were not ready. And the Indian government did not dispute the statement by Germany. This is called a face saver. The Indian government allowed Germany to issue a face saving statement. But the Indian government is not run by children. The Indian government knew exactly where the plane was. If it was coming early, they would have known about it hours in advance. So these comments, I mean, I missed in the past. I said that Indians are less naive now. Indians are more mature in diplomacy and geopolitics. But clearly, I have to eat my words because that is not the case. The Indian government gave a snub to Germany. Germany has been, playing certain geopolitical games and interfering in India's internal affairs and making statements about things that it has no business making statements about. And as a result of that, India has given Germany a message by snubbing their foreign minister, but not by not giving her the red carpet welcome that you would typically give a very high ranking official. And then Germany gave this statement to save face, and India did not dispute that. So the message was given, and Germany was allowed to save face. So please understand that if an aircraft is arriving 30 minutes early, and if it's a very high ranking person who's coming, the Indian government will know about this long in advance. The government is not run by children. Please understand this. Please grow up a little bit, I would say. Next. Okay, Aditya says, what are your thoughts on Modi Laoxian in China? Aniket says, talk about PM Modi's Chinese nickname. Atharva says, please make a video on Modi Laoxian. This term is quite popular in China. Vedant says, what is the meaning of Modi Laoxian? Why is it becoming popular in China? Okay, and this is just a sample of the lots of comments I've got about this matter. So let's take a look at what this entire thing is about. So this is apparently a nickname that is that the Chinese netizens use for Prime Minister Modi, and let's take a look at this. So uh, this is an article on the Diplomat. How is India viewed in China? And this is where it all started. The story, as far as I know, it's by a Chinese person. So let's go down, and you will find the okay. In addition, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has an unusual nickname on the Chinese internet. Modi Laoxian. Laoxian refers to an elderly immortal with some weird abilities. The nickname implies that Chinese netizens think Modi is different, even more amazing than other leaders. They point to both his dress and physical appearance, seen as Laoxian like, and some of his policies that are different from India's previous ones. In particular, India, led by Modi, can maintain a balance among major countries in the world. Whether it's Russia, the US, or global South countries, India can enjoy friendly ties with all of them, which is very admirable to some Chinese netizens. So the word Laoxian reflects the complex sentiment of Chinese people toward Modi, combining curiosity, astonishment, and perhaps a dash of cynicism. Uh, I've been doing international media reports for nearly 20 years, and it's rare for Chinese netizens to give a nickname to a foreign leader. Modi's nickname stands out above all others. Clearly, he has made an impression on Chinese public opinion. So that's the deal about the Chinese nickname for Prime Minister Modi Laoxian. It is a rather positive nickname they have given. They typically don't even give nicknames to leaders of other countries, but for Prime Minister Modi, they have given a nickname and a positive nickname. Um, an elderly immortal with very strong abilities, that sort of thing. And this is Bilibili, which is something like a Chinese version of YouTube or something, in which you can see there are lots and lots of videos about Prime Minister Modi. And this is the automatic English translation, so the translation may not be entirely accurate over here. As you can see, we can change it back to Chinese, and there we go. If we try to change it to English, it will take time. So they clearly are very curious about Prime Minister Modi and seem to hold him in reasonably high regard. And this is another Chinese website. Modi. This is another automatic translation. As you can see, Laoshan seems to translate into English as old fairy or something like that, or mana boundless. Um, so yeah, it's an article that talks about Prime Minister Modi in a very positive way, and it's clear that they have a lot of admiration for Prime Minister Modi. So that's the deal. That's what this nickname is about. First of all, the Chinese typically don't give nicknames to foreign leaders, and they typically historically they have not had a very uh, positive view of India. They have not really admired any Indian leader. So this is the first Indian leader in decades who has stood up for India, who has been totally uncompromising when it comes to promoting and serving India's national interest. He has turned India around from where it was in 2014 and turned it into the right direction. India now means business. Indian diplomacy actually has a spine today. So all of these qualities is it's something that everybody admires. If you have a leader like that, even if your enemy nation has a leader like that, you may not like the nation, but you will certainly respect the fact that this leader is taking care of the country. And so that's what the Chinese nickname of Prime Minister Modi is about. It's a positive nickname. They see him as an elderly and very wise and a very capable person. And the fact that they've given a nickname speaks to the tells us that they admire Prime Minister Modi. You will see such sentiments even among the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have no love for India. We know that. I mean, most of them. Yeah, most of them have absolutely no love for India, but they still kind of feel a tinge of jealousy towards India for the fact that India has produced a leader like Prime Minister Modi. They wish they had somebody like that. So yeah, that's the deal with about this nickname that they have given, that the people of China have given to Prime Minister Modi. It's not the Chinese government that has given this nickname. It's the people of China that have come up with this nickname for Prime Minister Modi. Modi Laoxian means the Modi, elderly immortal, or some kind of person with supernatural abilities, elderly person, wise person, and overall it's a very positive nickname. So it's nice to see this interesting thing, and you can read more about that online. Okay, this is somebody from Armenia who has written this. It's not really a question, it is a comment. In historical Armenia, before the Armenian genocide, there were bosha communities. They were Indian originally, but Christians. One of them is this Armenian national hero, Sebastatsi Murad. Let's take a look of at that on. Okay, let's just Google it, and it will typically give you a Wikipedia thing. Well, okay, let's take a look. Why not? Statutory warning: you can't trust Wikipedia for information about India. Anyhow, this is about Sebastatsi Murad. Uh, he was born in 1874, died in 1918. Let's see what he looked like. He does look Indian. Definitely, it's an Indian appearance. Yes, correct. He was a well-known Armenian fidai, means freedom fighter or suicide. I mean, somebody who puts his life on the line, I guess, during the Armenian national liberation movement from the Ottoman Empire. He was born in whatever village, Govdun, and all that. He moved to Constantinople. He joined the Social Democrat Hunchakian party and all that. He assassinated an Armenian informer, escaped to Greece, then to Egypt. He was a guerrilla and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's not surprising, for me at least, that there are people in Armenia who have Indian origin, Indian ethnicity, people whose ancestors came from India. Because see, Indians have lived throughout Central Asia in deep antiquity for millennia. Uh, you still find ruined Hindu temples in Central Asia. Armenia is not entirely Central Asia; it's the Caucasus region. Do we know where the Caucasus region is? In case we don't know, let us put the map on the screen. Where's the map? Here's the map. One second. So let's see where Armenia is, where the Caucasus region is. All right, let's zoom into Armenia. So if you want to find the Caucasus region, you go west from India, you get into the Black Sea region. There's the Caspian Sea on the right, the Black Sea on the left, and the region between these two seas is the Caucasus region, Kavkaz. And there we have the nation of Armenia. And you will find ruined Hindu temples in this region. In the in the Azerbaijani capital of Baku, which is not far from Armenia, you even have a functional fire temple that was used by Hindus as well as Zoroastrians in a few centuries ago. I'm sure it's still operational today. So the Central Asian region has had an Indian past, a Hindu Buddhist past. Before Buddhism existed, it was a Hindu past. Um, And Indian traders, they traded with this region during the Turkic occupation of India, during the Maratha era, during the British occupation of India, and before the past 1,000 years of foreign occupation of India. Um, you will find you will see that Indian Hindu idols have been discovered deep in Russia as well. And to reach Russia from India, you would need to go through Central Asia and maybe the Caucasus region. So, lots of trading communities used to live here, and eventually they simply assimilated into the local populations. That's what typically would have happened. So, that's why you have the Bosha community in Armenia. And obviously, they were of Indian origin, and eventually they would have assimilated culturally and religiously, which means that they would have adopted Christianity, and they became Armenians, and they fought for Armenia, for freedom from the Ottoman Empire. So, interesting piece of history we have just discovered here. All right, next. Saif Mahmood says, I'm a big fan of yours from Bangladesh. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Recently, there's been much discussion surrounding the topic of the dominance of BlackRock Incorporated. It is said that BlackRock has a great amount of influence on the global economy thanks to its reach in the corporate industry across the globe. They have stakes in and massive control over almost so many corporations all over the world. It's also said that they control the world. Is it true that they really have this power? Do they have more significant influence than anyone else? Interesting question. BlackRock is a major corporation, and one that very few people somehow know about, because they don't really produce anything. It's an asset management company. So they own stakes in various other companies. They don't really produce anything. They own stakes, shares in various companies. So if you look at the top 10 banks in the United States, I think BlackRock more or less has significant holdings in most of these banks. The top 10 banks in the US. So the entire banking system in the US is essentially, in some way or the other, owned by BlackRock, or BlackRock has significant stakes in there. If you look at the major news outlets in the US, Fox News or CNN or whatever else it is, most of them have significant uh, well, BlackRock has significant holdings in them. Interesting. And not just the United States, it's all across Europe, even in Asia as well. If you look at the entertainment industry, Hollywood, etc., Disney or Comcast or Warner Brothers or whatever, I'm pretty sure BlackRock has significant holdings in there as well. When it comes to Europe, the various media outlets, newspapers or digital platforms, etc., BlackRock has a significant interest in there as well. When it comes to social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever else, BlackRock has a significant hold on that as well. Australia also is deeply, there's a significant BlackRock presence in Australia. In Asia as well, one hears. I'm not sure how deep it goes in India. I've not really had the time to look into that, but one must be aware of the fact that this is a possibility. Um, when it comes to the size of BlackRock's overall holdings, it's I believe it's in excess of $9 trillion. Trillion, not billion or million, $1 trillion. So when you say $9 trillion, do you understand the magnitude of that? India's annual GDP is 3 point something trillion dollars. When you have assets in excess of $9 trillion, you are it's bigger than all the economies of the world, barring the US and China. So that's how large BlackRock is and its holdings are. And since it controls significant portions of social media, well, it can influence social media. Since it controls all these news outlets across the world, it can control the messaging that's being given out in the global media. Uh, and since, well, even companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and whatnot, it's excuse me, much of them have so BlackRock owns significant portions of these companies as well. Excuse me. So yes, they have massive influence, they have massive control and influence are different stories. Control they definitely do have of many corporations across the world. And because they don't produce anything, and because their logo isn't displayed all over the place like you would see other logos, that's why very few people know about the existence of BlackRock. But it's an incredibly large organization, $9 trillion plus. That's incredible. That's humongous. That's larger than the GDP of India and other nations apart from the US and China. So very powerful. They can control the messaging that comes out of the media. In the US, there's this divide, right? The Republicans versus Democrats, and some news outlets are pro-Republican and most are pro-Democrat. Well, BlackRock has holdings in both sides, so they don't care. So they can put their message across out there. um, and so clearly it's a extremely large and extremely powerful and influential corporation, organization, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, they are more powerful than most governments. Yeah, that's how the world is run. Interesting. Neeraj Deshpande says, I would like to ask something about the mainstream Indian media. Why does the Indian media not seem to understand and reflect the real stand of India on various geopolitical, national, international issues? It seems to always portray the Western side of the story. In order to succeed on various grounds, we must align internally on how we reflect the Indian interest, our stand and direction to the world. Could you please shed some light here? What are the different possibilities? So yeah, this is an interesting question. I've remarked about this in the past, that the Indian media is clueless when it comes to geopolitics. They essentially echo the Western the the message of the West and the perspective of the West. That's what is portrayed in the Indian media. I mean, I hardly watch news anymore because it's a waste of time. But one, I remember a few months ago, I was in a hotel. I just randomly switched on the TV and I was watching some Hindi news channel in which they were reporting the Western perspective. That Russia is losing and Ukraine is devastating Russia and all that stuff. Well, we know what the situation is right now. So the Indian media simply. So why is it like this? Is the question, and it's a good question. First of all, see, the Indian media, there is a certain amount of laziness there. That let's just watch BBC or CNN and then say the same things in Hindi, so it looks like we know everything. So they'll watch the BBC or the CNN or Fox News or Al Jazeera or whatever it is, and then just regurgitate the same talking points in whatever language, in Hindi or whatever. But then we have the English language Indian media, which also uh, repeats the Western perspective, the Western talking points. Why is that? So one reason for this is that they don't have any experts. See, until very recently, the only understanding of foreign policy in the Indian media had was Pakistan. Foreign international relations means Pakistan. Indian foreign policy means Pakistan. It was all Pakistan centric. So that's all they understood. They understand Pakistan reasonably well. But now that people have realized finally that China is a bigger threat and India is playing a bigger role in the global geopolitical scenario, the problem for the Indian media is that they don't have any experts. You watch any news channel or whatever, when they report about the stock market, they will bring in stock market experts. When they report about the economy or finance, they will bring in financial experts. When they report about politics, they'll bring in political affairs experts who have spent their entire career studying and understanding politics. When it comes to geopolitics, they earlier used to bring in some people called strategic affairs experts. Now those people have been rebranded as geopolitics experts. But the problem is that there is no university in India or college that teaches geopolitics properly. There are some courses on international relations, but they are all, I mean, yeah, nothing impressive about that. So there are no real geopolitical experts in India, academic, who have studied it properly from an academic perspective and who understand what geopolitics actually is. It's all about actually understanding history, understanding the history of politics worldwide, understanding world history, understanding the history of various regions, understanding how warfare happens, understanding the nature of power. None of this is taught. You have various master's degrees in political science or whatnot. I don't know what they teach in there, but it's all pointless and useless. So the problem with the Indian media is that they don't know where to look for geopolitics experts. They typically would invite various retired army personnel, generals, etc. But the thing is that when most army personnel see the relations between various nations from a military perspective and from the perspective of strategy and tactics, mainly tactics. It's a tactical perspective that they have. So they will look at the map and they will talk about the 100 meters here of the border and this half kilometer there of the border. That's not how you see geopolitics. So that's the problem that the Indian media is facing. And of course, some news readers have become quite popular because they have been covering international relations for a long time. And but yeah, their reporting of definitely leaves a lot to be desired, unfortunately. So this is the problem. So then they take shortcuts and they simply look at the what the Western media is saying and they kind of repeat the same talking points. You will see that certain Indian media channels actually sent their reporters, some reporters, to cover the Ukraine conflict, but they exclusively covered the conflict from the Ukraine side of the fighting. None of them was embedded with the Russian troops so that we can get a two perspectives, a balanced perspective. No, they simply sent their reporters to the Ukraine side and they reported everything from there, and they reported the great Ukrainian heroism and patriotism and all that nonsense. Well, the Russians are also patriotic and they are also fighting hard, but they did not report anything from that side. So it's one-sided coverage, very clear and very blatant. So then that raises the question of who is funding these media outlets, where is the money coming from, and why are they adopting this policy of showing a one-sided perspective of the war? Why don't send three reporters on one side and three reporters on the other side and show both perspectives? That would actually illuminate things way better and give Indians, the viewers, the correct perspective. Both perspectives of what's happening on both sides. So one possibility is that they are just lazy. They'll just watch the English news or Western news and regurgitate the same talking points in Indian languages. When it comes to the Indian media, first of all, there's the lack of experts. There are no real geopolitical experts in India. There are a few, but I'm not sure what's happening with them. I know a few that I genuinely respect. Uh, but most of them are not seen these days on Indian media, and if they are seen, they're talking about something else. So so there's a lack of experts, and then they resort to inviting retired army personnel who have a very military perspective. I'm not trying to denigrate any army personnel or any retired army officers. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that they have a very military perspective, a strategy and tactics perspective. They may or may not understand the historical aspect properly. Geopolitics is all about history. Some obviously will understand it. I'm not saying all of them are like that. So these are the problems. And then obviously there's the question of funding. Where are these news outlets, media outlets funded from? Where is the funding coming from? That is the biggest question you have to always ask yourself. So yeah, these are the problems that we are seeing in the Indian media. And of course, see, I don't know of any course, university or college course in India that teaches the students what the national interest is. What is the definition of the national interest? It's not some vague term that everybody talks about and says Jai Hind. That's not how it works. The national interest has to be studied in detail. What are the components of the national interest? And every nation has different interests. So none of this is ever taught in the Indian education system. So then everybody has their own weird perspective of what the national interest should or should not be. It's not about slogans, it's about something else. So these are the reasons why the Indian media often, if not always, almost always appears to be clueless and appears to be regurgitating the Western perspective. These days we have a few individuals who are taking a different track, but yeah. All right. Okay, I got a bunch of questions about this as well. Vatsal says the US is sending its ambassador to India after 2 years after a gap of 2 years to New Delhi. What are your views on this? Is the US now seeing its national and geopolitical interests inclined with India, or shall we call it the Boeing effect after Air India orders? And Siddhant says, Could you tell us about the new ambassador selected for India by the US government? What are your thoughts on him? Also, in relation to earlier thing you've said, our elections in 2024, but it has already begun for our Western partners. Well, they are not really our partners. They are, yeah. So, yes, so we have this happening right now. Before we put that on the screen. So, this person, Eric Garcetti, let's put that on the screen. Eric Garcetti has been appointed, or is on the verge of being appointed, the U.S. ambassador to India after a gap of more than 2 years, roughly 2 years. They are finally appointing an ambassador to India. And see, even before he reaches Delhi, what is he saying? Human rights to be the core of his engagement. What business does a foreign nation have talking about human rights in a sovereign nation? This is the problem with the US. They think they have the right to interfere and meddle in the internal affairs of other nations. So even before this individual reaches India, he is saying that he will have direct engagement with groups fighting for human rights in India. First of all, let's understand that the US deep state, the Pentagon, which actually rules the nation, has blocked the US president from making a deposition, or putting a certain uh, perspective in front of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and accusing Russia of human rights violations, because that will that will blow back on the US, which has committed much bigger human rights violations in the past century or so, and even in recent times. So one of the biggest violators of human rights in the whole entire world is the United States, and they will come here preaching human rights to India. So yes, they are on the verge of appointing their ambassador to India. Is it the Boeing effect? It has nothing to do with Boeing. Do they think that national and geopolitical interests are aligned with India? Their geopolitical interests are aligned with nobody. When it comes to the US, their geopolitical interests are their own, and they force other nations to align with them, and their geopolitical interests serve nobody else. So it is not that their national and geopolitical interest is aligned with India, inclined with India, whatever. They would like to use India as a counterweight and counterbalance to China, as long as that serves the purpose, and whenever it's done, they will not care anymore. It is not the Boeing effect, because India has nowhere to go. There are only two nations that produce commercial, high quality commercial aircraft. Two companies, one is Boeing and one is Airbus. So if India says we will not buy your Boeings, they'll say don't buy our Boeings. Where will India go? So that's the deal. So it's not either of these things. It's not the Boeing effect. It's the 2024 effect. The US would like to see a weak government come to power in 2024. So they would like to, you know, interfere in India's internal affairs, in India's democratic process, in India's electoral process. They would like to play this, what they call sub-national diplomacy. They would like to rake up the issue of these fictitious human rights violations or whatever. They would like to meddle in India's internal affairs, and now it makes sense for them to send a chief meddler to India. So that's why they have appointed this individual. What's his name? Eric Garcetti. So he's making it very clear that his job is not um, to be a diplomat and bring the two nations together and whatever an ambassador actually is supposed to do. His job is to talk about human rights. It's going to be the core of his engagement. I think India should reject him as an ambassador if this is going to be the attitude of the US. Anyhow, that's the deal. So it's about 24. It's about 2024. They would like to see a weak coalition government come to power to India. And they will, I'm sure, do their best to create trouble in India before the elections, in the build up to the elections. Expect trouble, expect more and more US interference in India's internal affairs over the next 1 year, until the next general elections happen, and expect a lot of propaganda on the Western media and in the Indian media as well, including that publication I just showed on the screen. All right. Tejas says, why is it raining worms in China? Why is China like this? Let's take a look at this raining worms thing. Let's go to Google and search for it. I heard about this thing. It's raining worms in China. China worm worm rain. Let's take a look. Oh my goodness. Take a look at this. So it's been raining worms in China. Lovely, beautiful. And apparently these worms look like earthworms. So that's what the question is about. Why is it raining worms in China? Why is China like this? Uh, in the past, there have been incidents when it's rained fish falling from the sky in rain, raining from the sky. There have been times when it's rained frogs in various parts of the world. So, in various parts of the world, you have rain of fish falling. In other parts, you have rain of frogs falling. There have been incidents in Japan reported about falling fish and all that. So let's understand why this happens. There is a phenomenon called a water spout. Let me put that on the screen. Water spout. Put that back on the screen. So it's essentially a tornado that occurs over water. A tornado is like a giant vacuum cleaner. It sucks things out. It's in the heart of the tornado is a region of extremely low atmospheric pressure. So when you have low pressure, everything gets sucked into it, and it's a whirling tunnel. So when this sort of phenomenon happens over water, it sucks out, it sucks up water and sucks the water up into the cloud, and then the cloud moves on, and eventually it will disgorge the contents that it sucked up, that the water spout sucked up. Uh, so when this water spout happens, like it's called, it's a water spout. It happens over water. It's a tornado over water. So when this happens over, let's say, a river or a pond or a lake or the sea, lots of fish will get sucked up into it, and then eventually they will fall back to the ground, to earth eventually, because how long will they stay up there? Uh, so that's how you have rain of fish falling. Now, if this happens over a pond or a lake, you may have a bunch of frogs that get sucked up. And then eventually the frogs will fall down and obviously perish. Unfortunately, that's how it goes. So you have a rain of frogs falling. And for some reason, it looks like this phenomenon apparently happened over a place where you had lots of worms. So then it led to a rain of worms falling, and that's as simple as it is. So that's why it rained worms in China. It's a phenomenon that is very rare, but it's known to happen. It's been reported and recorded lots and lots of times. And it's not a great mystery. It's just because this process pulls up, sucks out whatever it is, the contents of the water body it occurred over. So if it happens over a place where there are lots of worms, it's going to be the worms that are sucked up and eventually disgorged somewhere else. So that's why you had a rain of worms in China. Very weird phenomenon, but it's not a big mystery. Okay, this is by Prakhar Gupta. It's a question from Twitter. What are your views on Mexico's willingness to join BRICS? How come a country right next to the US border took such a bold step that is a direct threat to US hegemony? Well, I suspect that democracy and freedom and human rights will soon come to Mexico. Yeah. See, let's understand the history of the US Mexico relationship. There was a time when Mexico, the nation of Mexico, included California, included Texas, included Arizona, Colorado. All of this was taken out of Mexico through force. There was at least one war between the US and Mexico, and the Americans annexed, invaded, conquered, and annexed all these territories. So Mexico used to be much larger, and it was defeated by the US, and the Americans gobbled up all the territory, all this enormous territory. And then you have a straight line border between the US and Mexico today. So the Mexicans obviously remember this. They obviously, and the Americans have this policy of not allowing any external interference in the Americas. They are supposed to be the only hegemon, the only great power in the Americas, whether it's North America or South America. And they it's well known that they have funded various extremist organizations, terrorist organizations, drug dealers, etc., in Central America, South America, whether it is Mexico, whether it is Colombia. and so on. It's well known. It's part of the historical record. The CIA and etc. They all, even when it comes to Nicaragua, etc., they have interfered in the internal affairs of all these nations. And much of the drug trade that happens is alleged to possibly perhaps be overseen and orchestrated by various elements within the United States. What do they call it? The deep state. Yes. So obviously, these nations would like to be free of this hegemonic overlord. So maybe Mexico is taking a risk, and maybe they have expressed their willingness and their desire to join BRICS. Obviously, it is something that will not please the US very much. Uh, so yeah, it's a risky thing they are doing, because they sit right next to the US. I'm sure I don't need to show the map where the US Mexico border is, but just in cases, let me put that on the screen and show the map. Google Maps, here we are. Let's go. Here we go. So as we can see, the US Mexico border has lots of straight lines. There was a time when Nevada, California, uh, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, all of this, I'm sure even Colorado, if I'm not mistaken, was all part of Mexico. And the Americans took that by force. So, yes, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, all these nations are under US hegemony, directly or indirectly, mostly indirectly. Uh, so I think it's a bold step. It's a dangerous step, and I'm afraid that human rights and democracy may soon visit Mexico. Yeah, one hopes it doesn't happen, but yeah, it typically tends to happen when you make such moves. Okay, Shri Balram Putin says, from 1933 to 1939, in just 5 to 6 years, how was Hitler able to develop such a humongous, scary military? How strong was he when it came to leadership? So Hitler was, first of all, let me just put this disclaimer in case somebody doesn't understand or realize, Hitler was an evil person. He was a bad guy. He did horrible things. Okay, let's put that out of the way first of all. Now, how did he manage? How did he succeed in building up this enormous military in just this short span of about 6 years? So Hitler and his party, the National Socialist Party, National Socialist Party, Nazi Party, they came to power in 1933, I think, and this ended more than a decade, of political instability and economic disaster. And it gave a clear direction of what Germany's future should be like according to the Nazi ideology. So what these guys did, what Hitler and his government did, is that they instituted very strict controls on wages and prices, and by doing that they ensured that business remained profitable, and they sought to bring the inflation down. They also, what they did was they took control of all the labor unions in Germany. So this ensured that workers would not hold the country hostage. They would not, strikes and labor actions. All of this was prohibited. So because of this, it ensured that businesses became profitable and inflation went down. Then the Nazi regime promoted self-sufficiency. They encouraged, or rather insisted, the Germans should buy German made products, and they cut down on imports. They limited the imports of various things. So this helped boost the domestic economy and domestic production, and it helped protect and promote domestic economy and domestic production. Then they promoted and established a system of autarky. What is autarky? It's a nation that is an autarky is a nation that is self-sufficient in all the raw materials and all the basic things. Russia is a good example. They don't need to import anything from anywhere. They have everything within their own territory. So the Germans they established a kind of autarky to create a closed economy that was self-sufficient and not dependent on foreign imports and independent from foreign influence. They also restructured the banking system. They nationalized many banks. They centralized the control, like it is the way it is in an empire. So this stabilized the financial sector, which was ruined by the aftermath of World War One, and they also ensured that businesses got the money that they required. They had a 4-year plan or something, which was all about making Germany self-sufficient in raw materials and to reduce the country's dependence on waste exports and all that. They also established trade agreements with other countries in Eastern Europe and the Balkans to boost their exports and boost the economy. And we obviously know what they did to the Jews. So they persecuted Jews, they expelled Jews and other minority people, and confiscated their properties and their businesses, seized their assets, and used that to finance the government's program. So that is also there. And then the Nazi regime, it embarked upon a huge program of public works, the construction of dams, of these big highways, autobahns, other infrastructure projects. So this created jobs and stimulated the economy. They promoted industry, they encouraged the growth of industry, and the major things like steel production and weapons and armaments. So this modernized the economy. It created huge numbers of new jobs, and by doing all this they were able to first stabilize the economy and then make the economy boom. And because of their emphasis on the industry, the steel manufacturing, the arms manufacturing industry, that's how they were able to very rapidly build up a very sizable, very powerful, and very modern military. And they obviously implemented a program of conscription, which means that young German men must serve in the army. So this obviously gave them employment, and it gave jobs for the young men, and it expanded the size of the military. And they also understood the importance of science and technology, research and development. So they invested heavily in research and development. They promoted scientists who had bright ideas. Uh, and so much innovation came out of this. So much innovation. Whether it is in the first ballistic missiles were developed by the Germans, the first cruise missiles were developed by the Germans, the first jet engines were developed by Germans. Some of the best aircraft designs came out of Germany. Military innovations, military strategy. So all of this was made possible by this entire revolutionary restructuring of the financial system, of the economy, and all these measures that they took. So that is how, in just 5 or 6 years, Hitler and his party, the Nazi party, were able to create an incredibly powerful military, maybe the most powerful military of all time, of that time. So yeah, that is what Hitler did. And obviously, he, like we said, he was a very evil person. He killed lots of innocent people, and eventually he dragged his country into ruin. So yeah, the most important quality a leader should have is that he must succeed. And Hitler failed, and he ruined his nation in the process. And the result is that Germany is still under US occupation as of today. Yeah. Mazhar Chachar says, what were the reasons behind the recent re-establishment of ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Who were the key players that brought about the two nations to the negotiating table, and what concessions were made by each side? Moving forward, what does the future of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran look like, and what implications could it have for the broader Middle East region? So let's understand what went wrong in the Saudi Arabia-Iran relationship. See, first of all, it's a religious, a sectarian issue. The Saudis are a Sunni nation, and Iran is a Shia nation. So it's a Shia Sunni thing. The two don't get along. Um, then we also know that Saudi Arabia has been under US sway. It's essentially a US client state. It's been that way for the longest time. And after the Islamic Revolution in Iran is seen by the US as one of its primary enemies. And the Americans have imposed very harsh sanctions on Iran and tried to totally ruin Iran's economy. And Saudi Arabia is on the side of the US. And Saudi Arabia also supported Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war. So all of this historical baggage is there, which is why the two sides don't trust each other, and there's a huge amount of hostility between the two. Uh, in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was a period of good relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They even came to certain agreements and all that. They signed some agreements of cooperation, friendship, all that. Um, then what happened in recent times is, I believe in 2016 or something, the Saudis executed a dissident who was a Shia or something like that, and that is the incident that prompted Iran to break off its relations with Saudi Arabia. There were protests in Iran, and Saudi embassies were stormed or something like that. um, and because of this escalating tension and hostilities, the two nations broke off diplomatic ties. This is in 2016. um, Now what we see is that there is a new ruler in Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. He is focusing on modernizing and transforming Saudi Arabia. Today you see that the US is no longer dependent on Saudi Arabia for oil. The US is more or less self sufficient. The US is now a net exporter of oil and petroleum products. And so the Saudi Arabian regime realizes that you cannot keep on banking on oil forever. The only reason for the incredible prosperity in Saudi Arabia is the oil production. So you can't keep banking on that forever. So Mohammed bin Salman is trying to transform Saudi Arabia. He has made the nation a little more liberal, little more progressive in the real sense. I mean, women have been given rights for a change. They can now drive. They can now keep their hair open, show their hair in public or something like that. Yeah. So there are reforms there. And they Mohammed bin Salman has this plan 2030 or something. By 2030, he wants to totally transform Saudi Arabia and make the economy more dependent on tourism and other things. So there is a transformation that's happening in Saudi Arabia, and for the nation to remain prosperous and for the long term, in the long term, they will need to have peace in the region. Now Iran and Saudi Arabia are embroiled in proxy wars. There's a big proxy war that's happening in Yemen that no one talks about. It's a horrific human rights disaster that no one talks about. Uh, the Houthis are supported by Iran, and the opponents of the Houthis are supported by the Saudis, and this proxy war is going on. And the two nations, Saudi Arabia and Iran, have tangled in other places as well, like Syria and other places. So there is this long standing hostility between the two nations. But Mohammed bin Salman realizes that the region needs peace and stability for his nation to keep prospering. The Iranians are also, they have been suffering from US sanctions for a very long time. They would also like to see some stability and better relations with the neighbors. uh, and obviously the US influence, not power, US influence in the region is decreasing, it's waning. uh, there is rapprochement of sorts between Saudi Arabia and Israel as well. So there's a very complex scenario there. So it is in both nations' interest to re-establish diplomatic relations and to tone down to some extent the hostility. The Yemen war will still go on. It's not that easy to end that war for various reasons, which I will not go into right now because this is not the topic. Uh, so that's why this development has happened, and the Chinese have taken the initiative to bring the two nations together and have the agreement or whatever it is signed in Beijing. And the official statement given out by the Saudi foreign ministry recognizes the fact that China played a role in this, a significant role in this. So the diplomatic relations are now reopened, and both nations will reopen their embassies in the respective nation within the next 2 months. And both nations apparently want to be part of BRICS as well. So for that also, it makes sense to re-establish diplomatic relations. So it looks like uh, so the Saudis would like to kind of wean themselves off of US influence. The US has too much power in the region. They would like to embrace a more multipolar world. Uh, these are the developments that's happening. So what is the future of the relationship? I think the Yemen proxy war will continue. Unfortunately, it's terrible for the people of Yemen, but that's what it is. It's not that easy to disengage from that. Even if Saudi Arabia withdraws its support from one group, but it's a very complicated issue. It's an issue that goes back more than a century, and definitely since the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it's a proxy war that's essentially been this. The war is happening between the Houthi rebels and the government. The government in Yemen is supported by the Saudis. The Houthis are supported by Iran. Now, the Saudis got embroiled in this at the behest of the US, actually, if you go back in history and study some history. So it's a very complicated scenario. So there's going to be hostility, there's going to be tensions, but at least they're talking now and they have diplomatic ties. And hopefully in the future, they may, succeed eventually in the long run to bring down the tensions and establish more friendly relations. Uh, so in the broader Middle East region, you are seeing a shifting of priorities. Uh, every nation realizes that you cannot keep on depending on the US forever. The US influence is waning, not power, influence is waning. The Chinese are trying to show that, and the Chinese are also making this play. The Chinese are trying to show the world that we have this diplomatic influence and we can get two enemy nations together, sit down together, and resolve the differences. And they may want to play the same role of a mediator in the Ukraine conflict as well. That may be the big game they are playing. So that is the situation. That is what's happening right now. The Middle East is extremely complicated. It's been ruined and totally complicated by the West. So we are a long way off from complete normalcy and peace in the Middle East. Daniel Nicholson says, with the soon to be formed integrated rocket force as the fourth military arm of the Indian armed forces, is India now looking at a contactless war strategy vis-a-vis China? How long would it take us to attain the level at which the People's Liberation Army rocket force already are? Interesting question. So yes, India is about to form the what is going to be called the integrated rocket force of the Indian military. It's going to be the fourth arm of the Indian military after the army, navy, and the air force. So uh, India is more or less self-sufficient when it comes to missiles, especially when it comes to ballistic missiles. When it comes to cruise missiles, we are still perfecting the technology. We have this subsonic missile. What is it called? Nirbhay, is it? So, in which we are developing the motor, the turbofan motor. I think it's called the Manik or something. It's under development and it could soon enter production. So once we have that, the subsonic cruise missile will be 100% indigenous. When it comes to ballistic missiles, India is 100% totally indigenous. When it comes to the supersonic BrahMos, it is significantly indigenous, but the I think the guidance system and the ramjet motor is imported from Russia. And because of the terms of the BrahMos corporation, it's gonna be that way for the foreseeable future, that we will keep on importing the ramjet engine, and the guidance system from Russia. But I think it's time that India should develop its own ramjet and scramjet rocket engines and maybe come up with new missiles, new hypersonic missiles or supersonic missiles. But overall, India is in a very good position when it comes to missiles. We also have so these days, what kind of war fighting has changed completely. Historically, what you would have is that if there are two enemy nations, adversarial nations, let's put something on the map and just take a look at the India Tibet border, because that is an excellent example of what we are talking about here. So let's put that on the screen. So we have this lengthy India Tibet border which stretches from Arunachal Pradesh all the way to Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir. So in the past, historically, when two nations had a shared border and they were adversaries and they went to war, the war always started at the border with the two forces facing each other. That's where the initial battle would happen, and then the war will go in one direction or the other and maybe move into the territory of one nation or the other. That's how typically historically wars were fought. Today it's the other way around. We have seen how the Armenia Azerbaijan conflict has gone. We have seen how the Ukraine conflict has gone. Wars are now no longer uh, it's like Daniel says, contactless wars. So the first salvos of the war will be done by long range long range systems, typically by missiles. So the the first strikes will always be at the command centers, at the ammunition depots, at the army and whatever bases, at the airports, at places where you have tanks and ammunition and troops and all that. So it's going to be deep inside the enemy's territory. That's where the first salvos will be fired. And because nowadays rockets, I mean missiles can be quite accurate and and hit targets with pinpoint accuracy, that's become more the case. So these days, it's the first action is deep in the enemy's territory, on both sides territory. And it's typically it's the two armies that face each other along the border. They will typically be the last to engage each other in combat. So the entire order of battle has been reversed essentially. That's how modern wars will be fought. So when it comes to the Indian army, we have artillery, which is guns. Then we have rockets, not missiles, but rockets, which typically have a range of about 90 kilometers at maximum. And then we have missile systems, short range ballistic missile systems, like the Pralay, for instance, which have a range of, I don't know, how much is it? 200 kilometers, 500 kilometers, maybe 700 kilometers. So you can target the enemy's assets at various different ranges using all this. So it makes sense to have an integrated rocket force. uh, Otherwise what will happen is that the army will have its own doctrine of how to use missiles. The air force will have its own doctrine of how to use missiles. The navy will have its own doctrine and rubric of how to use missiles. But you want, and they may not talk to each other as efficiently as you would want them to. I mean, we have learned the lessons of the Kargil war and all. When the army wanted air support, the air support took like 2 weeks to come, and that sort of thing. I mean, I may be wrong what the time duration was, but you know there are all these issues that have occurred in the past. So what we would like to have is a single integrated rocket force, where all the decision making is done within itself. And as per the situation, we can use the missiles wherever required. So it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the exact structure of how it's going to be structured is not yet known to us, but it needs to happen soon. And for that to happen, we need to have sufficient quantities of missiles. It's not enough to have 400 BrahMos missiles lying around in the country. Obviously they'll be deployed in the right places, but we need thousands of missiles of various kinds. And we also need to have conventional ballistic missiles. We have the strategic forces, whatever it's called, which takes care of our nuclear deterrent, which is nuclear tipped ballistic missiles, the Agni missiles and all that. uh, we so the integrated rocket force will be a conventional force, not a nuclear armed force, as far as I can see. And they will have ballistic missiles of various ranges. uh, so when you launch a ballistic missile, it's impossible for the recipient of this package, the nation that you're targeting, it is impossible for them to know whether it is a nuclear armed missile or a conventionally armed missile. So when somebody launches a ballistic missile, you don't know what warhead it carries. That is one of the issues when it comes to ballistic missiles. But yeah, when you have two nuclear armed enemies and neighbors, you kind of don't worry about that too much. Uh, so we have the Pralay missile, which is similar to the Russian Iskander missile, short range ballistic missile. We have the Nirbhay missile, the Shaurya missile. We have a whole menu of various kinds of missiles. So it makes a lot of sense to form an integrated rocket force and give them sufficient missiles to fight an extended war. At least a short duration war, you will need at least 1,000 missiles, I would say. But one, I would say ideally India needs to have a stockpile of at least 10,000 different missiles of various kinds. Uh, so yes, India definitely is learning the lessons of the various wars that are being fought in the 21st century. Uh, it makes sense for us to invest in an integrated rocket force to be able to fight a contactless war against China, and to make them understand that it's not in their best interests to fight a war with India. So how long will it take us to attain the level at which the which the Chinese rocket force is at. I think it will take at least 4 to 5 years for India to attain that level. First of all, we have to create the integrated rocket force, we have to structure it properly, and then we have to arm it with sufficient numbers of missiles. So I'm sure we can crank out the missiles at a reasonably rapid rate. Missiles are much easier to manufacture than aircraft. Aircraft are extremely complicated machines. Missiles are much simpler. So we can crank out hundreds of missiles a year, maybe thousands of missiles per year if we can um, construct the facilities. So it may take 4 to 5 years for India to create an effective deterrent that the Chinese would really worry about. All right, next question. Komitet Gosudartsvenoi says, can you tell us about the invasion of the Kievan Rus by the Mongolian Empire and why it doesn't have an influence over modern day Ukraine, which is in Central Asia and the Caucasus region? Interesting question. The invasion of the Kievan Rus by the Mongolian Empire. Yeah, that's an event in history that is not really spoken about a lot. Let's take a look at the geography. So, so about 1,000 years ago, we had the Kievan Rus, which is the Slavic peoples who were ruled over by a bunch of Vikings, the Rus, and that's how the nation eventually got its name, the nation of Russia. So their capital originally used to be Kiev. The capital of the Rus people was Kiev. Right now, it's the capital of Ukraine. So at that time, it was Kiev, and they were called the Kievan Rus. Now, this invasion of the Kievan Rus by the Mongolian Empire happened in the 13th century after the death of the great Chinggis Khan. So Chinggis Khan did not ever fight a war without just causes. He did not just randomly conquer a country because it was rich and he wanted the wealth. He fought for genuine reasons and just causes. But after his death, his descendants started fighting wars for the sake of conquering, for the sake of conquest. So they would fight unprovoked wars. So after Chinggis Khan died, I think in 1227, his son Ogodei Khan became the great Khan of the Mongols, the great Khagan, and he inherited his father's great general, Subotai Bahadir, the valiant, one of possibly the greatest military general in the whole of history. So, this guy, the new Mongol Khan, the son of Genghis Khan, he instructed his general Subotai to mount an invasion of Europe. So I think it was in 1237 or so that Subotai went with his army, and he one of the official leader of the Mongol invasion was, I think, Batu Khan, the son of Jochi, who was a son of Chinggis. So Batu happened to be Chinggis Khan's grandson. He was the official leader of the Mongolian army, but the real leader was Subotai. So they invaded the Russia, which was then the capital was in Kiev, and I think within a couple of years they were able to conquer it very easily. I mean, it was not that easy as I make it sound. There were battles, and sometimes it was quite difficult, and sometimes the Mongols may even have lost a battle or two. But overall, because of the incredible, unparalleled brilliance of Subotai, they were able to make reasonably short work of the Rus, and they were able to take Kiev and other cities, and they allowed the Russian princes or the ruling class to keep on ruling, but they made them their vassals. They extracted heavy tribute from them. uh, so that was the invasion of the Kievan Rus by the Mongolian Empire, and eventually this gave rise to what is called the Golden Horde, which was the Mongols who ruled Central Asia. Eventually, they became Turkified. Eventually, the Golden Horde. So the invasion of the Kievan Rus by the Mongolian Empire happened in the middle of the 13th century, and it was pretty harsh, pretty brutal. um, and the Mongols ruled Russia for at least a couple of centuries. The Russians were able to throw off what they call the Mongol yoke by the 15th century or so, with the rise of Moscow as the new center of power. So that is in brief about the invasion of Rus by the Mongolian Empire. Why doesn't it have an influence over modern day Ukraine? as it has in Central Asia and the Caucasus region. Because when it comes to Central Asia and Caucasus, these regions became Islamized, Turkified. The Mongols of the Golden Horde eventually themselves became Turkified, and by the process, because of the process of Turkification, they eventually adopted Islam. Mongolia has never been Islamic. I'm talking about the nation of Mongolia over here. This nation has never been a Muslim nation, but the Mongols who conquered Central Asia eventually became Turkified, Turkicized, and they became Muslims. Because of that, Central Asia and the Caucasus region is an Islamic region, is a Muslim region. Most people in Central Asia and the Caucasus region. I'm not talking about Georgia, or Armenia. I'm talking about Azerbaijan, Dagestan, Chechnya, all those regions, which are currently part of Russia. Uh, so because of that, Central Asia and the Caucasus became Islamized and Turkicized, Turkified, whatever we call it. But Ukraine never, this never happened there, because the Russians were eventually able to uh, free themselves of the Mongols and expel Mongols from Russian territory. So because of that, it never happened there. Of course, there is still a significant Mongol influence in Russia. I mean, the Mongol occupation of Russia did do some good to Russia. It gave them an administrative system which was continued to some extent even after Russia became free and Moscow emerged as the center of power. And many Russians would have some Mongol ethnicity, some Mongol ancestry, as a result of about a couple of centuries of Mongol occupation and some intermingling of people and all that. So that's the legacy of the Mongol occupation of Russia, uh, and that's why it did not have that much of an influence on Ukraine. Abhimanyu says, "Is it true that the Earth's axis was straight before the younger Dryas event, and it tilted after this calamity?" Good question. Let us take a look at the Earth's axis. So you can see Earth in space. It spins like this. It rotates, yes, and it it orbits the sun. The orbit is not a circle; it's an ellipse. It's like a squashed circle. So the Earth goes around the sun in an elliptical orbit, and all the planets go around the sun in similar elliptical orbits. And the all the planets, they go around the sun in the plane of the solar system. The plane of the solar system. Now, when we take a look at the plane of the solar system, you will find that the Earth's axis of rotation is not straight; it is inclined somewhat. Uh, so the Earth's axis of rotation, it's rotating like this, and it's going around the sun. So the axis of rotation compared to the plane of the solar system is not straight; it's inclined. And there is a precession also. It's called the precession of the equinoxes. So the question is, was the Earth's axis of rotation straight at 90 degrees to the plane of the solar system before the youngest Dryas event? And did it tilt after this calamity? So the younger Dryas event is something that happened about 11 or so thousand years before today. It was a sudden period of global cooling. And we have discovered evidence of an asteroid or comet or space rock strike. Um, a buried crater has been discovered in Greenland, a crater which is an impact crater, and other evidence may also exist of an asteroid strike around this time. So maybe it was an asteroid strike that contributed to the sudden cooling event. So that's called the global Dryas theory. Maybe that's why it happened. So the question is, was this space rock or asteroid impact on Earth the event that caused the tilt of the Earth, of the axis of rotation of the Earth? Well, it's not the case. Uh, the younger Dryas event, if it was caused by an impact from a space rock, was not that significant. It did not cause a global extinction event, which means it was a small impact. 66 million years ago, there was an enormous impact, the Chicxulub impact event. Uh, Let me show you where it happened. It happened in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula. Where is Yucatan? Here it is. This is Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. south of the Gulf of Mexico. Let's find the town of Chicxulub. Where is it? Merida. And where is it? One second. Should be somewhere here. This definitely is Yucatan. Okay, it's somewhere here. I'm temporarily unable to locate it. Let's just search for it, and it will zoom in. There we go. Here it is. So this is approximately where the impact happened. Now, this was a massive, massive impact. It was much larger than anything that happened during the Younger Dryas event. The impact crater itself is about 180 kilometers in diameter. Enormous. Half of it is under the ocean, under the sea, in the Gulf of Mexico. This was a major impact event, and the object, the space rock that hit the Earth, was about 10 kilometers in diameter. Enormous, like a small city, like a big city actually, 10 kilometers in diameter. So that's a massive impact. So the Younger Dryas event was very small compared to that. So it's clear that the Younger Dryas event did not cause the tilt in the axis of Earth's rotation. I'm sure, pretty sure it was not even the excuse me. I'm pretty sure it was not even the Chicxulub impact that caused the axis of rotation of the Earth to tilt. It would take something much, much larger to tilt the axis of rotation of the Earth. So maybe this event was the event that caused the creation of the moon itself. So there's this hypothesis that Earth, the young Earth, was hit by a small planet which no longer exists. It was a major collision, and this collision was so massive that huge amounts of lava and the magma and all that was thrown out into Earth's orbit, and eventually coalesced together and formed the moon. So an impact of that size between Earth and a small planet, that would be something that would cause the Earth's axis of rotation to tilt. Not some small, tiny space rock, 10 kilometers or so. That's not big enough to cause such an event. So most likely it was a much older impact in the early days, young days of the solar system, that caused the Earth's axis of rotation to tilt with respect to the plane of the solar system. Okay, Swapnil says, how does blood work against gravity? In the sense that it reaches our brain from our heart. Good question. So, we feel the force of gravity, which is because of the mass of the Earth. So, everything falls down, it falls towards the direction of the center of the planet. So, how does blood work against gravity? How does it reach our brain from the heart or wherever it is? How does the blood reach my fingertips and all that? How does it happen? So understand this. Uh, let's say you take a piece of glass and you rub it with silk or whatever. It's gonna get charged, yes. And if you have a piece of paper lying on your table and you bring this piece of glass to the charged piece of glass towards the piece of paper, it's gonna pull up the piece of paper and the paper will stick to the glass. So this small electric charge is able to defeat the entire gravitational strength pull of the entire planet. If you have a small magnet, and you have a pin, metallic pin, iron pin on your table, this tiny magnet, you bring it towards the pin will be pulled up and it will stick to the magnet. So this tiny little magnet is able to defeat the gravitational pull of an entire planet. What does this tell us? It tells us that gravitation, the force of gravity, is the weakest force we know of. It's incredibly weak. A tiny little magnet can defeat an entire planet. Right? So understand that gravity it's incredibly weak. Let me tell you exactly how weak it is. We don't see them, but there is something called a neutrino. A neutrino is a kind of elementary particle, and the sun gives off neutrinos. So trillions of solar neutrinos, which are given out by the sun, they pass through the Earth every second. They pass through us every second. Right now, there's a whole flux of neutrinos passing through me, and I have no idea. We don't see them, we don't feel them. Neutrinos, these elementary particles, they interact through the weak force, the weak nuclear force. And this force is incredibly weak. Yeah. But The truth is that gravity is even weaker than the weak nuclear force. Gravity is a million, trillion, trillion, trillion times weaker than the neutrino's weak force. So such a weak force, it's so easy to defeat it. A tiny magnet can defeat the gravity of an entire planet. So how does blood defeat gravity and work against gravity? Because the heart pumps it, and the heart is stronger than the gravitational pull of the planet. So the heart keeps pumping the blood whatever times per minute. I think depending on person to person, between 45 and 70, 80, 90 times per minute. So it's the action of the heart's pumping that pushes the blood throughout the body and wherever it is supposed to reach. It's that easy to defeat the force of gravity of an entire planet. Incredible. Antriksh Saini says, what was the original name of the Hindu Kush mountains? The original name of the Hindu Kush mountains was the Upari Shena mountains. Upari Shena. It's Sanskrit, obviously. Uh, so Upari Shena means Shien. The word Shena in Sanskrit means eagle. So these mountains were so tall, so high that even eagles could not fly above them. That's what it actually means. Uh, so so that's what the original name was. Now it's called the Hindu Kush, the killer of Hindus. And there's a horrible bloody story behind that. And I'm sure we all know what the story is. After the invasion and occupation of India by the Turks, millions of Indians, mainly women and children, were taken away as slaves, and they were made to pass through these mountains, these frigid mountains. They lived in the Indian subcontinent. They were used to warm weather, and lots of them died in those snowy passes of the mountains. I'm sure if you go and do some archaeological work there, you may find frozen bodies of Indians who died there. And those who survived were taken to Central Asia and sold off in the bazaars of Bukhara and Samarkand as slaves. And you will see even today lots of Central Asian people who have some Indian appearance. And you will see lots of Indian looking people in Arabia as well, in Yemen and all that. So that's why the name changed from Uparishyena to the killer of Hindus, Hindu Kush. The original name was the Sanskrit name Uparishyena Mountains. Gaurav says, what do I think about there being a stagnation in the field of theoretical physics since the standard model came out? What do you expect? Where do you expect the next significant breakthrough to be? So, yes, it is true that theoretical physics, has hit a brick wall. The last great major breakthrough was in 1980 or 81, which was the proposal of cosmic inflation, for which we have found experimental evidence. Cosmic inflation. After that, there has been no new breakthrough in theoretical physics, none whatsoever. Why is it so? It's because of groupthink. It's because a certain mafia has taken over theoretical physics, especially in the West. The string theory mafia. String theory is a failed theory. It has produced no experimentally testable predictions. It has made no predictions that can be experimentally tested. It's all math, and you will see dozens of papers, research papers coming out every week in string theory, but it doesn't advance the field of physics or our understanding of the universe even 1 inch. So because all the funding is being poured into string theory and all that, that's why there is no space for research in other avenues. It's all group think. Everybody is made to think the same. Everybody needs to do their PhD in theoretical physics. If you want to be a professor, a tenure track professor, you need to be in string theory. In string theory, I didn't mean theoretical physics. I mean string theory. So string theory has taken over the academic system, the theoretical physics academia in the West, and it's producing no results whatsoever. So there are lots of brilliant physicists, young physicists, older physicists, but they are all doing the same thing. So that's why no results are coming out, and there has been no progress in theoretical physics since the 1980s, since the early 1980s. There must be, when quantum mechanics was first discovered, you had people who thought differently. Einstein thought very differently from everybody else. Today, that is discouraged. Today, that is strongly discouraged. You do research in a very different in a different way. Your paper will not get published. It will not be approved for publication. So that's the kind of thing that's happening. And that's why there is this stagnation. So where do I expect the next significant breakthrough? There are so many open problems in physics. We understand next to nothing of the universe. 95% of the universe is invisible, it's dark to us. 70% is dark energy, 25% is dark matter. We have no idea what these things are. Various theories and models have been proposed, but none of them has been experimentally verified or falsified thus far. So 95% of the universe is not understood at all, zero. So there's a huge unsolved problem in theoretical physics. Dark matter, dark energy. What about the baryon asymmetry, the matter antimatter asymmetry? I mean, according to physics theories and models, when the universe was formed 13.8 billion years ago, in the Big Bang, there should have been equal amounts of matter and antimatter produced. But clearly, there was slightly more matter produced than antimatter. What is matter and antimatter? What are these things? These are different kinds of particles which have opposite properties, such as electric charge. When they come together, they annihilate each other and produce pure energy. So, why do we have more matter than antimatter? We still don't have the answer. So that's a big breakthrough we need to come up with. What are black holes? What is inside a black hole? Why do we have singularities? Clearly something is wrong there. That needs to be solved. Quantum gravity, we don't understand gravity at all. General relativity does not is not compatible with quantum physics, with quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, space is smooth and time is absolute. In general relativity, space is curved and time is relative. Totally different ways of looking at the world. So these two don't match, but we need to make them match to come up with a quantum theory of gravity, so that we understand how gravity is relevant in the ultra microscopic quantum world. That's another big outstanding problem in physics. There are so many more. What about all these free constants lying around in the standard model? Oh, the masses of the quarks. How? I mean, what is the explanation of why a certain quark has a certain mass? Why does the electron have a certain mass? Why do various subatomic particles, elementary particles, have specific masses? We have no idea why. These are called these free constants. We have no idea why these masses are the way they are. So we have no theory of that. So once again, that's a huge open question, a huge open problem in physics. Then a grand unified theory. We would like to understand how the various forces of nature are related. We need to unify them into a single framework. What are the four forces? The gravitational force, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and the electromagnetic force. So how do we unify? How do we understand all these forces in a single frame, as part of a single framework? When the Big Bang happened, all the forces were unified into a single force, the grand unified force. So we have no idea about that as well. So that's something people have been, the best physicists in the world have been working on for close to a century, and we have made no breakthrough yet. So these are some of the problems, the open problems in physics. There are many more. So the ultimate fate of the universe. We know that the universe began 13.8 roughly billion years ago, but what's going to be the ultimate fate of the universe? Are we going to have a big freeze? Are we going to have a big rip? Are we going to have a big crunch? Big freeze means eventually the universe will keep expanding, keep expanding, keep expanding, and eventually all matter will be so widely dispersed far apart from each other that it will not be able to interact with itself. And the universe will reach a state of maximum entropy disorder, and this is called the heat death of the universe. That's one possibility. Then the big rip is when dark energy becomes so aggressive that not only are planets ripped out of their orbits from the stars, the moon will be ripped out of the orbit of the earth, but but atoms will be ripped apart, molecules will be ripped apart, subatomic particles will be ripped apart, even the fabric of space-time itself will be ripped apart. That is the big rip. The big crunch means eventually expansion stops and the universe starts contracting. Eventually it collapses upon itself and becomes a new singularity, and maybe a new big bang happens. So these are the possibilities that exist, but we don't know what's actually going to happen. There are so many open problems in physics. What is the dimensionality of the universe? How many dimensions does the universe have? We see the world in three dimensions, and we experience something called time. So those are four dimensions that are involved in general relativity, four-dimensional space-time. Kaluza-Klein theory is about five dimensions in the universe. Uh, Superstring theory says it requires 10 dimensions. M theory describes space-time as having 11 dimensions. Bosonic string theory says there are 26 dimensions. And Dr. Subhash Kak has come up with a new theory which says that the universe has E dimensions. E is called Euler's number. E is equal to 2.7183, blah, blah, blah. It's an irrational number. So the universe may not be three-dimensional or four-dimensional. It may be E-dimensional. It may be 2.7183 dimensional, which is a mind-bending prospect. But the theory does seem to make a lot of sense, and it throws new light on the origin of gravity and the open problems of dark matter, dark energy, and even the Hubble tension. So there are so many open problems in physics. We know next to nothing of the universe, and we are talking string theory. We keep on doing string theory which produces no results. So that is why there is this stagnation in theoretical physics, because the string theory mafia has taken over all the funding and all the control in physics, and there is this permeating group think all over the place. And in the experimental physics, it's the particle accelerators where all the funding goes. So all the funding goes where, well, no new results are coming out. The Large Hadron Collider is the most expensive scientific instrument ever built. It's produced one result. It's proven Peter Higgs right. A prediction he made in the 1950s or 1960s. The Higgs boson has been discovered. Apart from that, it has discovered nothing new. No supersymmetry, no micro black holes, nothing. So we are dumping money, we're pouring money into the wrong avenues. We need to look at different ways of thinking. But we are doing groupthink. So physics needs to move away from string theory and explore weird, strange, unexplored domains, ways of thinking. Let people think differently. Let them come up with ridiculous theories, but at least something new will come out of it. So that is the problem. And that's why theoretical physics is stagnating. It really makes me very angry. Anyhow, I hope that answers the question. VIP says, what is more important in a war, a symbolic victory or a strategic victory? As in Ukraine-Russia conflict, many are saying that the city of Bakhmut does not have much of a strategic significance, but they are still fighting. Okay, let's talk about Bakhmut first. Let's put something on the screen. Since we are talking about Bakhmut, they've been saying this for months, that Bakhmut has no strategic significance. Why are the Russians fighting so much in Bakhmut? Now what are they saying? Look here. Exclusive. This is from March 7. Today is March 12. So this week itself. This is from CNN. Zelensky warns of open road through Ukraine's east if Russia captures Bakhmut, as he resists call to retreat. So for the longest time, they were saying the Russians are stupid and they are fighting in this place which has no strategic importance. But now Zelensky himself is saying that Bakhmut is the key to Ukraine. If Russia captures Bakhmut, they will have an open road through Ukraine's east. So please, my dear friends, please don't trust the media. The media is misinformation. The media is propaganda. The media wants to mislead you. The media is lying to you. All right? So please understand that. So Bakhmut is strategically vital. And that's why the Ukrainians are throwing so many unfortunate, hapless soldiers into the Bakhmut meat grinder. And yeah, we know what's happening. The Russians are on the verge of taking the city now. So what's important in a war? Important in a war, a strategic victory or a symbolic victory? It's always a strategic victory that's important in a war. Why do we fight wars? A war has a certain objective, a certain political or geopolitical objective. So a war is fought in the pursuit of that objective. It's not pursued for symbolism or whatever. You either want to capture a certain amount of territory, otherwise you want to capture the capital city and effect a regime change. You may want to demilitarize a country. You may want to denazify a country. These are strategic objectives. These are geopolitical or political objectives. That's why you fight wars. So if you fight a battle and you do a heroic job, but you don't achieve your political objective, then it's a loss, even if you win that battle. So what's the only thing that is important in a war is to achieve the objectives which you had in mind when you started the war. You don't start a war out of emotions or anger or because you're furious with something somebody said. You start a war for very clear objectives. And that's the only thing that's important in a war. Rodrajit says, in a federal democracy like India, various regional parties are using federalism to promote sub-nationalism for their political interest. Yes. Which is gradually dividing India internally. Yes. The effect of this is clearly visible in South Indian states. If it continues like this, our country's integrity won't just be threatened from the outside, but from inside as well. What is the solution? Why is the situation the way it is today? Why do local political parties have so much power that they can even indulge in soft secessionism, soft separatism? Because how are they able to do this? It's because of the Indian constitution. It's because of the way India has been created, the constitution. It defines India as a union of states, or I don't know what exactly it is like, but the constitution is the key to all this. Unfortunately, there is too much democracy in India, which means that the regional parties and the states have too much power. I'm not saying they should not be empowered. They should have full freedom economically and with respect to local policies. But when it comes to the national interest, only the center should be all powerful. So when it comes to international affairs, when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to military affairs, and when it comes to the national interest, the center should be paramount. And there are certain red lines that nobody should be allowed to cross under any circumstances whatsoever. So for a nation to remain strong and unified, certain things cannot be allowed to happen, like sub-nationalism and soft separatism, and attacks on various languages and people from other parts of the nation. This should never ever be allowed. But in the current scenario, in the current uh, system that we have, it's par for the course. So what India needs is a new constitution. It's not that easy as it sounds, making a new constitution, because there is no provision within this constitution that allows this constitution to be discarded and a new constitution to be brought in place. So something will have to be done eventually. And we will need a really strong leader to do this. The current constitution is nothing but a mishmash of Western constitutions. There is nothing Indian about it, nothing Indian about it whatsoever. So this constitution eventually has to go. And this is what Professor Gautam Desiraju also has spoken about in detail in his conversation with me. He's written a book about this, that India needs a new constitution, a constitution that is rooted in Indian values and Indian culture. It should be Indian and Indian civilization. So the current constitution we have is a Western constitution. There is nothing Indian about it, and it is creating all kinds of problems in India. So that is the solution. Okay, what next? Ranesh says, in our 10th standard history book, it's written that Mr. Gandhi mentioned in his book Hind Swaraj that if Indians refused to cooperate with the British, then we would have gotten independence in a matter of time. But during the Royal Indian Navy mutiny incident, the Navy mutinied against the British. But why did Mr. Gandhi send Mr. Patel to negotiate with the Navy and to suppress the mutiny? Doesn't that contradict what Gandhi said before? Can we also say that Gandhi was sold to the British later in the independence struggle? So I don't know what is written in that book, Hind Swaraj. I have not read Mr. Gandhi's book. Well, yeah, because I was not so inclined. It's not interested. So I haven't read his book. I don't know what is written in that, Mr. Gandhi. What we do know is the events of the the British Indian Navy's rebellion, which happened in 1946. They all rebelled. The entire Indian Navy, with the exception of one or two ships, rebelled against the British. And the Navy was stationed from all the way from the Gulf of the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, all the way to the Strait of what is it called? The other strait, Malacca, all the way there, even Singapore. So we had this enormous Indian Navy, and all the ships revolted against the British. It was a major disaster for the British. And if the British Indian Army had come to know about this, and if they had rebelled, it was the end of British rule in India overnight, like that. So what Mr. Gandhi did is that he said, I do not approve of this nonsense. I will not approve of any rebellion against the British. We can only rebel non-violently and through words. No actions, please, no actions. So he dispatched Mr. Patel Sardar Patel, to Bombay. It was then called Bombay. It's now Mumbai, but at that time it was called Bombay. So he dispatched Mr. Patel to Bombay to negotiate with the sailors and to make them uh, end their rebellion. So Mr. Patel came to Bombay. He entered into negotiations with the representatives of the Indian Navy. He told them Mr. Gandhi disapproves of this. Mr. Jinnah also disapproved of that, by the way. So Mr. Gandhi disapproved of this, and he told them that, listen, you need to stop this, and I give you the assurance that no action will be taken against you. No action will be taken against you. Just lay down your arms and surrender. So, because no political support was forthcoming except for the Communist Party, which had its own agenda, the Muslim League did not support the mutiny because they wanted their Pakistan, and a mutiny would be disastrous for that. And Mr. Gandhi did not support it, so the Indian Congress Party did not support. So, because of this, the soldiers they lost their morale and they surrendered. And the moment they surrendered, they were arrested and they were placed under court martial. So Mr. Patel, whatever assurances he gave, those were empty words, uh, and they were immediately arrested and prosecuted. So Mr. Patel was Mr. Gandhi's right hand man. He was a loyal servant and disciple of Mr. Gandhi. Whatever Mr. Gandhi said, Mr. Patel would carry it out. And Mr. Patel was Mr. Gandhi's means of controlling the Congress Party. So Mr. Gandhi opposed the mutiny, because if the rebellion had succeeded and the Indian army, which was stationed across the subcontinent, had come to know about this and they had also rebelled, that was the end of British power overnight. The British ruled India through the armed forces. Political power flows out of the barrel of a gun. They did not rule India because they had the cooperation of various things or whatever. They ruled India through might and force only. And when their instrument of rule turned against them, it would be the end of the story immediately, overnight. And Mr. Gandhi somehow did not want this, because then there would have been no partition. And then maybe the armed forces leadership would have taken over. And maybe they would have invited Mr. Bose back to India. And then Mr. Gandhi would have been sidelined, his party would have been sidelined, Mr. Jinnah would have been sidelined, and Mr. Bose, most likely, who the army held in very high regard, Mr. Bose would have been the leader of India, quite possibly. So, for the sake of power, for the sake of politics, or whatever you want to interpret as, Mr. Gandhi ensured that the rebellion ended and India did not get its independence in 1946 itself. If this had succeeded, India would have gained independence through strength, through force, not through negotiations and politics. And in 47, what happened is that the British gave India so-called independence on a platter. It was a transfer of power from one set of crooks to another set of crooks. And as a result, India is still bearing the consequences of all that, even today. So that's the story. That's what really happened. Can we say that Mr. Gandhi was sold to the British later in the independence struggle? Later, earlier, if at all, if not, I will leave that to you to decide and to conclude. You are intelligent enough to understand what really happened. Sarang says, I was surprised to find that many of my friends don't think that preserving Indian culture is important. Why do you think this is the case? Is it because of the education system? Is it because of the Western-led media? What can we as citizens of India do to make our country's relationship with English and our own languages similar to that of French and English in France? Their education and everything is in French, but they are not too bad at English. Listen, the French don't really like to speak English. They prefer French. Okay, so why is it so? Listen, if you don't teach anything about your culture in school, then the kids will have no connection with their culture, and then they will feel what's the point? There's no harm in getting rid of Indian culture. The Indian education system does not teach Indian culture at all to the students. There is no connection. So when there's no connection, there's no value. So that's why your friends don't think that preserving Indian culture is important, because they don't even know what Indian culture is. They don't feel any sense of belonging, any sense of connection, any sense of value. That's the reason. The education system is designed to destroy Indian culture. That's what it's designed to do. It's the continuation of the 19th century colonial education system. Yes, today they will teach you computer science and they will give you MBA degrees and all that, but it's the same education system, the same format, the same purpose. It's not designed to teach you how to think, it's designed to tell you what to think. It's not designed to turn out leaders, it's designed to turn out sheep. So mainly it's because of the education system. See, the Chinese have their own education system. They are also exposed to Western media when they come out of China, but they don't become anti-China. They don't, turn their back on Chinese culture. It's because the education system is right for them. I don't know what they teach, but I'm sure that they teach Chinese culture, and they inculcate a sense of pride in their culture and patriotism and all those things. India doesn't do that at all. The Indian education the system teaches kids to hate their own culture and their own ancestors. That's the deal. So that's the reason why your friends don't think it's important to preserve Indian culture. They think Indian culture is inferior and bad and misogynistic and patriarchal and blah 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 blah. All that, you know. Um, what can we do to make our country's relationship with English and our languages similar? Listen, everybody should try and learn their own language. Try and read some books in your own language. Try and learn Sanskrit if you can. One of the things you could do is purchase a copy of some book in Sanskrit and in English or whatever language you prefer. For instance, purchase a copy of the Ramayana or the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit and purchase the exact translation in whatever language you prefer, and then read both. You do this process over a year or so, you will actually end up learning a lot of Sanskrit. So this is what you can do, or you can read books written in your own native language. Everybody should have some connection with the language. So we cannot keep blaming the government for everything. Obviously they are not doing their job of promoting Indian languages. So let's take the initiative ourselves. Buy a book in your own native language or whatever language you're fond of, and read that. Spend some time doing that. We need to all take the initiative. That's what we can do as people, as citizens. Neil Mundell says, please guide me. How to rebuild curiosity as it was in my childhood. Currently, I'm a teenager. How to regain the joy of learning, questioning, reading books, understanding, etc. My curiosity is killed because of the pressure from society and the education system. Harsh teachers, boring, useless books, fearful exams, which says to memorize everything instead of questioning. We've forgotten to question why. Now I hate books and my mind has stopped observing and questioning the surroundings. Such as earlier, I used to ask questions on topics such as the universe, technology, environment, biology, philosophy, physics, languages. But now I'm trying. But getting failures to regain my curiosity as it was back then. Listen, you clearly understand that something has happened, and because of the education system and all that, you don't like books anymore. Okay, we understand that, we all go through that. What you really need, see, you actually do understand and you do realize something has happened. So to rebuild, rekindle the curiosity, you first of all need some time to yourself. If you're always surrounded by people who all think the same way, then it's impossible to think differently. You need to have some time alone to yourself in a day, maybe a couple of hours, and then try to go back to the feeling of how it was when you were a child and what things you were interested in. So today, teachers will tell you that your question is stupid or whatever. They will not answer your question. But today you have the internet. So think about those things you used to be curious about and fascinated with and passionate about as a kid, as a younger kid. And today you don't need teachers. Just use Google or whatever it is. All the information is available on the internet. Learn how to search the internet and study whatever makes you curious. So it's about, making some space for yourself, finding some time for yourself, where your alone time, your private time, in your privacy, you can pursue certain pursuits. You know, and not all books are boring. You have to open an interesting book. So if you just surround yourself with your school textbooks, it's going to remain boring. So it's when there is a distance between you and whatever you were curious about, or whatever you enjoyed, there will be a process of climbing up that hill again. So I would say find some book, or if you don't like books anymore, use the internet. But you have to find a way of reconnecting with things that you are passionate about. So At the end of the day, we all go through the education system, we all face it, and that's not going to be the excuse we can use to not be curious anymore. You got to preserve that thing that was good inside you. You have to fight for it. So you have to fight for it by finding time for yourself, let's say 2 hours a day, when you will not allow anyone to distract you, and then pursue your curiosity, rebuild it, reignite it. It's definitely possible. Okay, let's take some questions from the live chat. I have more questions that I picked, but let's take some questions from the live chat, maybe 10-15 minutes of that. So if you have any questions for me, then you can ask me now in the live chat, and I will try and take some of these. Bobby says, over time, the Indian education system could be world class. It can happen, but it will take some doing. There will be a lot of internal resistance from the stakeholders, those who those who benefit from the way the Indian education system is, and the entire system is built that way. So even well-meaning people will think that the education system, the way it is good. So there's going to be a huge amount of internal resistance if any kind of change or reform is attempted. But yes, once if we have a strong enough leadership, then it can certainly happen, and over time it can become world class. Okay, other questions. Let's see what other questions we have. Silicon Valley Bank collapse in the US. Yes, that SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, has collapsed. It's I think on the verge of bankruptcy, or already bankrupt. And yeah, it tells you what sort of system they have. Until recently, just a month or so ago, they were saying it was one of the best banks in the world, in the US. Forbes had given it some recognition and all that, and just a few days later it collapses. So yeah, maybe I should in a future episode analyze what really happened there, but yeah, that's what it is. Will Putin attend G20 meeting this year in India? I doubt if he will attend it. See, Mr. Putin is more or less isolated by the West, and I think he would not like to travel outside his country where he cannot control everything. There is definitely, when you are the president of Russia and Russia is standing up to the West, there is definitely the possibility and the chance of the leader of Russia being assassinated somewhere. So it is something that Mr. Putin would not want to do. He does travel to the to various neighboring countries where he can control where his government can control the situation very well, but yeah, apart from that, he right now is not traveling much far from his nation. So I think it is unlikely that Mr. Putin will attend the G20 summit this year, at the end of this year in India. I think it's unlikely. Okay, how to remember everything for UPSC? Well, I've never done that, so I don't know. I suppose you've got to find some. See, I'm not the right person to ask this. I have never tried to memorize everything and remember everything. That's not what I do. So maybe you should join a coaching class or something where they teach you the techniques of how to memorize things and all that. I think that's the best answer I can give you. I'm not big on memorizing things and remembering everything, especially information that is not really useful. So everything for you, what you study for UPSC, much of it is really not that useful in real life. How to control smartphone addiction? Find something else to replace that. Find something better to replace that. So smartphone addiction, I suppose it's where you keep scrolling through Instagram or whatever, right? That's what you do. I guess you have to find something more interesting that you can do. Maybe go play sports. When you're playing sports, football, cricket, you can't have the smartphone with you. Yeah, so that's one thing you can do. So a couple of hours of that per day, it will make you healthier, stronger, and it will keep the smartphone away. Or maybe if you're so inclined, pick up reading, pick up wrestling, pick up weightlifting, or go on a run, go on a walk. I don't know, you got to find something else to replace it. That's the main thing you got to do. Okay, let's see this. Recent research paper indicates the extinction of dinosaurs to Deccan flood basalts rather than the Chicxulub impact. There is now chronostratigraphic evidence of this. Well, I haven't seen this. This is the first time I'm hearing of this. So, Deccan flood basalts rather than the Chicxulub impact. See, the extinction of the dinosaurs happened roughly 66 million years ago. And at that time, there were two big things happening on our planet. One is the Chicxulub impact, which could have been a multiple impact, not just one, but multiple impacts. Maybe the impactor, the rock broke up, and there were multiple impacts. That is a possibility. There is this big crater off the west coast of India. It's called the Shiva crater, which also seems to date back to about 66 million years ago. So it could have been a multiple impact event. Apart from that, there was another major event happening in the world, which was the Deccan Traps volcanism. So if you look at the central India, Deccan region, you can see evidence of extinct volcanic activity, the Deccan Traps, the Badlands of India, the hinterlands of India. So there was this big super volcano eruption going on at the time. At that time, the Indian subcontinent was not part of it was not attached to Eurasia. At that time, it was somewhere in the Indian Ocean over the Réunion hotspot, which is where the volcanism happened. So it is possible that it was not just the impact event, the Chicxulub event, but also this massive volcanism and all the gas and everything that came out of it that could have together these two things together could have contributed to the extinction event that killed off the non-avian dinosaurs. So when you have a super volcanic eruption happening, a subcontinent sized volcanic activity happening, you will have the extinction of dinosaurs in India because of that itself. You would not need an impact event half the world away for the dinosaurs to die off. So there's been a big battle going on for the longest time as to what killed off the dinosaurs. Was it the Chicxulub impact event or was it the Deccan Traps volcanism? Most likely it was a combination of both factors. But when it comes to the dinosaurs within India itself, who lived in India, they would have been affected primarily by the Deccan Traps volcanism. And so, yeah. So it's an interesting piece of news that you are referencing over here, and I will definitely look that up. So these are my preliminary thoughts about what you are offering here. Interesting, very interesting. Okay, let's see what else do we have. Any other interesting questions? Um, okay, this how many planets are there in the solar system? Well, it depends on what you call Pluto. Some people say Pluto is no longer a planet; it is a minor planet or a dwarf planet or whatever. Listen, I don't care. For me, Pluto is a planet. When I was a kid, I thought of Pluto as a planet, and I will always think of Pluto as a planet. Obviously, it's very small. It's comparable in size to Earth's moon. So how many let's assume that we will call Pluto a planet. In that case, we have 9 confirmed planets in the solar system. Obviously, beyond planet in the Kuiper belt and all that, we will have other objects which are lurking around. They have discovered lots of minor planets or planetoids or planetesimals, such as Sedna and Quaoar and Makemake and Haumea and whatever the names they've given. Minor planets smaller than Pluto. There is Eris, which is bigger than Pluto, larger than Pluto. And there could be much more lurking out there in the deep, deep, far off reaches of the solar system. The solar system, it stretches outwards more than a light year away from the sun. There's the Oort cloud, which is this hypothetical huge cloud of icy objects, which is where planets, which is where comets come from. And there is the possibility that there could be a hidden planet somewhere out there, because when we look at the Kuiper belt objects and other objects over there, their orbits are inclined weirdly, which is something that would happen when there is an unknown massive object lurking out there. So there could be a large rocky or maybe non-rocky planet out there, but it's not thus far been detected. It may be so far from the sun that it may not be visible or really very well visible in sunlight. So we know of 9 at least, but there could be more out there. Space is enormous, it's vast, and who knows what else is lurking out there in the far reaches of the solar system. Let's take one more question. Um, Is it true that Mr. Gandhi wanted to dissolve the Congress? Yeah, I believe that he said that once independence is achieved, the Congress is no longer required and the Congress should be dissolved. But obviously, they did not agree with that, and the Congress still exists. Uh, Lots of other questions. Um, Ajay Reddy says, "What can the Rapid Dragon missile launching system be used for our missiles, and is it effective? Can it be integrated with high altitude balloons?" I am not aware of this Rapid Dragon missile launching system. Haven't heard of it, so I will look it up and maybe I can answer this next time. Interesting question. Is the younger Dryas event mentioned in any Indian scriptures? There are mentions of floods in Indian scriptures. If there was an impact event like the hypothetical younger Dryas event, maybe real, then there could have been flooding in various parts of the world, including in the Indian subcontinent. So there is this story of the flood, the Manu's flood or whatever it is. So that could perhaps reference an ancient flood, which could have been triggered off by the younger Dryas impact event. So possibly, perhaps, but we don't have clear uh, evidence of that, unequivocal evidence of that. AK, the guy says, is the US a systematic or institutional dictatorship? See, first of all, understand it's come out in the news, right? That the Pentagon has blocked Joe Biden's administration from going to the International Court of Justice and complain about Russia. So it tells you that the Pentagon, which is the deep state, the military establishment of the US, is more powerful than the White House, than the elected government of the US. So the relationship between the Pentagon and the White House is the same as the relationship between Rawalpindi and Islamabad. Rawalpindi is way more powerful than Islamabad. Similarly, the Pentagon is way more powerful than the White House, than the democratically elected government of the US. The Pentagon is unelected. And the US is a two-party state, which is just one step above a one-party system like the Chinese Communist Party or North Korea. Just one step above that, two-party system. So the US is not really a democracy. Please understand that. You could think of it as a nation that's run by a hidden bunch of people. That's what the US is. All right. Is democracy a sham? Like any system, we would expect democracy to evolve in India, but it seems neither government or people seem to be working on it. See, we need to have a better constitution, a better system, and then democracy will really work. India is the birthplace of democracy, but we had our own system of democracy. So democracy, at the very top, you had emperors and kings. But at the grassroots level, you had democracy. People would elect their own officials who would then work for the people. It was a hybrid kind of system, but it was way more democratic than whatever emerged out of Greece much later. So democracy in today's world is definitely a sham. Look at the US. And even in a properly democratic country, when you can rig the system by indulging in vote bank politics and all, that defeats the purpose of democracy. When you can do vote bank politics, it totally defeats the purpose of democracy. So overall, democracy is more or less a sham, and if you have too much democracy, it's actually harmful to your nation. So that's what I can say. Let's not blame the Indian people for this. We have this tendency of self-flagellation, keep blaming ourselves. It is not the fault of the Indian people that the country is in the situation. It is not the fault of the Indian people that power was handed from one set of crooks to another set of crooks in 1947. It is not the Indian people's fault that this constitution, which says we the people, was imposed undemocratically on India without it ever being ratified by the people of India. Understand what really has happened. Stop blaming ourselves. But that's what we need to do. And with that, I'm going to end today's session. With that, I'm going to end. Let's take one more. Why is POK now crying for help after 75 years? Also, there is news of a demand for Sindhu Desh in Pakistan. Since Sindhu Desh, they've been asking for it for a very long time. POK is now crying for help, and they are saying that Pakistan has given us nothing. For the longest time, they supported Pakistan. For the longest time, they supported Pakistan. When the Pakistanis, the raiders, the tribals did untold atrocities, massacres, in Kashmir in 1948. Despite that, the people of POK supported Pakistan. But now they can see that Pakistan is a failed state. And India has progressed way beyond anything Pakistan can ever achieve. And Kashmir is doing so well now. Right? So POK, the people of POK are feeling left out. So now they are crying for help. All right? Because they want a better deal. They want a better quality of life. They want better standards of life. They want better education. Everything is available across the border in India, in Kashmir. But in POK, there's nothing. They are marginalized. They are treated like stepchildren. That is the deal. So that's why they're crying for help. But they always supported Pakistan for the longest time. Anyway, we will eventually reintegrate POK with India sooner rather than later. Pakistan is a temporary nation, as we know. It's going to happen soon. Maybe very soon. Let's see. All right. With that, we end today's session. Thank you very much, everybody, for the wonderful questions. It's always fun taking these questions and answering them all. And I'll see you all very soon in the next live stream. Until then, take care and good night, good day, wherever you are. See you soon. Bye.